Well, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. You're watching AM Live. It's just 1 minute past 6 a.m. My name is Zainab Ismail and the date is the 19th of April 2023. Now, we have all the stories making headlines across the country for you. I also have all the papers here on the table for me. We'll be having a look at what's been making headlines in the dailies. But also in our discussion this morning, I want us to just move away from what's happening in the country. We're going to be having a look at what's happening in Sudan. So far, there are reportedly 185 people who've been killed since fighting broke out in Khartoum and other cities in Sudan, and about 1,800 people have so far been wounded in that fighting. So what's at stake here? What has prompted that fight, and really what are some of the ramifications for the region? That's what we'll be having a conversation about and taking a look at the military in that area. Remember, there's that fighting between the Sudanese army and a powerful paramilitary known as the RSF, or the Rapid Support Forces. That's what we'll be having a look at. What does it mean? Where did it stem from? And even in 2019, when there was another uprising, a coup, and there was also an agreement that was signed in December 2022. That's we'll be looking at that particular agreement and why it has not borne fruit. And also remember, there was supposed to be an election happening in Sudan this year. So what is going to happen? We'll be finding out in a moment. All right, so let's begin with those couple of stories fast before we get into a conversation and introducing my panelists. And 5 students of Mbihi Secondary School in Vihiga died on Tuesday afternoon after the vehicle they were traveling in collided with a lorry at Delamere in Naivasha along the Nakuru-Nairobi highway. 7 people, including 2 drivers who survived the accident, are receiving the treatment at the Naivasha Sub-County Hospital. The accidents that continue to be witnessed across the country show a worrying trend, with recent data from the National Transport and Highway Authority indicating that 1,258 people had lost their lives in road crashes as of the 13th of April. Ruth Sarmoi has more.
The journey of Mbihi Girls Secondary School students from Bale in Vihiga County to Nairobi was cut short after the matatu they were in collided head-on with a lorry a few kilometers from Naivasha town, claiming the lives of 5 girls.
This vehicle was trying to overtake a long fleet of vehicles near the Delamere part of the road, when unfortunately another lorry was coming from the Nairobi general direction, and it met head-on, and it was hit on the side and it flew several meters and landed in a ditch.
7 other people escaped with various degrees of injuries and are currently admitted at the Naivasha Sub-County Hospital, an issue that seems to be of concern to the cabinet. In its dispatch, the cabinet condoled with the families of the students who lost their lives and decried the increase in road carnage. The cabinet has directed the Ministry of Interior, in conjunction with the Ministry of Transport, to take remedial action and ensure that the traffic code is enforced. The accident happens barely a month after a bus ferrying Pwani University students and a Nissan Matatu were involved in an accident at Kayole area near Naivasha town, killing 19 people, among them Pwani University students. Meanwhile, the family of Martha Mwihaki, a Form 4 student at Koige Secondary School in Mau Summit along the Nakuru-Eldoret highway, has been thrown into mourning after their daughter was killed when a Tamid bus veered off the road and landed into a ditch, hitting some students on Monday evening. 3 other people died in the same accident.
Kaambiwa kuna watoto walikuwa wanatoka shule na wanapita kwa barabara wakahusika kwa hiyo ajali. Basi iliweza kufanya ajali na watoto wamelaliwa na basi.
Data from the National Transport and Safety Authority indicates that 1,258 people have died as of April 13th, compared to the same period last year, where 1,365 people perished. According to the data, 433 passengers have been killed, 340 motorcyclists, 226 passengers, 119 drivers, 118 pylon passengers, with 22 of them being cyclists. These numbers, however, is expected to rise after the inclusion of the latest victims. Ruth Sarmui, NTV.
Meanwhile, the Azimio la Umoja coalition has remained adamant that it will not participate in bipartisan parliamentary talks or the Kenya Kwanza alliance, but instead wants an extra parliamentary process to address the issue raised. The bipartisan talks seem to have hit a snag, with parties involved accusing each other of unpreparedness to participate in dialogue. NTV's Melita Oletenges reports.
In a statement read by Wiper leader Kalonzo Musyoka, Azimio announced it will not be involved in parliamentary bipartisan talks, insisting on an extra parliamentary process akin to the Kofi Annan-mediated National Accord of 2008. The coalition, in reference to a notice of motion by National Assembly Majority Leader Kimani Ichung'wah, says the motion has left out key issues raised by the Azimio coalition.
We remain committed to an extra parliamentary dialogue that is honest, transparent, meaningful, and bipartisan in conception and execution.
The lack of consensus between the two parties is turning out to be a major hurdle in resolving the issues highlighted by the Azimio la Umoja coalition, which include the reconstitution of IEBC, forensic audit of servers, and addressing the high cost of living. Azimio leaders say they will marshal their supporters to go back to the streets if an agreement is not reached.
That the coalition shall resume its weekly protests at the end of Ramadan, and further communication in this regard will follow.
National Assembly Speaker Moses Wetangula says he is not in possession of the list of Azimio members to the panel.
That I'm yet to formally receive the names of the members representing the minority coalition in Parliament and the draft text of the motion as proposed by the minority party.
Such a motion, Honorable Speaker, can only come to establish this committee if we are agreed on the terms of reference and what the committee is going to look into.
That we still have a lot of ground to cover. Because as we speak, there seems not to be an agreement or concurrence.
Leaders within the Kenya Kwanza alliance have accused Odinga of having underlying interests for threatening to pull out of the talks.
But now what we are now hearing them doing is shifting the goalpost. And it is very clear that these people are not interested in the talks. They are not interested in fact what they are asking for. And we have come to know.
Suddenly they have decided that they do not want to be part to the talks. Which reasons are they giving? We want to know those reasons so that we can agree and see whether we can have common place. Because at the end of the day, it is the common wananchi who is losing.
The standoff between the Azimio la Umoja coalition and the Kenya Kwanza alliance regarding the bipartisan talks continues to stall the process. Both parties, however, insist that there should be an engagement before the actual dialogue by the committee members in order to agree on the terms of reference for a fruitful engagement. Melita Oletenges, NTV, Nairobi.
And now, just what is the threshold of pressing charges at the International Criminal Court? Last week, the Azimio la Umoja party invited the Hague-based court to probe allegations of police brutality against its supporters during the nationwide mass protests. The opposition wants the Inspector General of Police, Japhet Koome, probed over the killing and maiming of its supporters. Brian Mshui now details that report.
Sunday's declaration by opposition leader Raila Odinga and a letter by the Azimio camp to the International Criminal Court (ICC) for its pre-trial chamber to authorize investigations against Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua as well as Inspector General of Police Japhet Koome has opened another battlefront between the government and the opposition.
Gachagua tunapeleka Hague. Na wale maaskari ambao walipiga watu wetu na risasi, tuna majina yao yote. Kesho yote tunapeleka huko Hague.
Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua as well as Inspector General of Police Japheth Koome have stated that they will not be intimidated by Azimio's decision to invite the ICC to investigate claims of police brutality. But just what is the threshold of pressing charges at the ICC?
The perception of scholars of international crimes who are aware of the Kenyan case is that what is happening is more hot air than reality. That it is more political posturing. It is more an attempt to use a kind of like a big brother out there to achieve local or domestic political goals.
This is not the first time that the International Court has been dragged into Kenyan politics. On the 15th of December 2010, the then International Criminal Court prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo named 6 individuals who were accused of being involved in the 2008 post-election violence. They were President William Ruto, who was the then Minister for Higher Education, immediate former President Uhuru Kenyatta, who was the Finance Minister, then Minister of Industrialization Henry Koskei, Francis Mudhaura, who was the then Head of Public Service, Cabinet Secretary and Chairman of the National Security Advisory Committee, Joshua Arapsang, who at the time of the post-election violence was a radio presenter, and Major General Mohammed Hussein Ali, who was the Commissioner of Police.
My name is Mohammed Hussein Ali.
It is the prosecution of Major General Mohammed Hussein Ali that the Azimio la Umoja camp is drawing parallels to how the Inspector General of Police Japheth Koome has so far handled the anti-government protests. The ICC prosecution alleged that Ali authorized the use of excessive force and facilitated attacks against supporters of the opposition Orange Democratic Movement ODM during the period's post-election violence. The opposition is accusing Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua and Inspector General of Police Japheth Koome of alleged assassination attempts, citing the 3rd of April 2023's event in Nairobi, where they claim nearly 10 rounds of live ammunition were fired at Raila Odinga's car. Brian Mushiri, NTV, Nairobi.
Now, 2 more bodies have been recovered from Shakahola in Kilifi County. These are the latest victims of the suspected religious cult spearheaded by controversial preacher Paul Mackenzie. So far, 10 of his followers have died, with reports of more congregants still stuck in the forest where they have been participating in the fast. NTV's Kevin Mutai visited a section of the Chakama forest where members of the group exist and filed this report.
We set off for Shakahola in Kilifi County, 230 kilometers from Mombasa, to unravel the mystery behind the alleged religious cult that has so far claimed several lives. In the company of police officers from Langobaya Police Post, we arrived at Pastor Mackenzie's homestead, tucked inside the thorny bushes of the vast Chakama Ranch. Here, we discover that the village is called Bethlehem, an area that is sparsely populated with different villages named after the cities in the Bible.
Sauti ambayo niliisikia.
A few weeks ago, in an interview with NTV, the controversial preacher disclosed that he was on a mission to preach the end-time message and denied being involved in the dreadful fasting exercise.
Niambie, kuna mahali labda wameenda wakaona kwamba kuna hapa mahali palikuwa locked watu. Iko nyumba maybe ama waya fulani ama fence fulani ambao imepatikana kule. Inaweza fungia watu ndani.
Not far from his house is another deserted village. These dirty utensils, the evidence of the last meal they had before abandoning their homes.
Yeah.
But within these homesteads covered with thorny shrubs lay shocking details. More than 10 people were rescued here. Beddings, tissue paper and a Bible are among the recovered items.
These are just some of the personal belongings in most of the holding areas where we believe victims were being held while fasting for days and night.
Ilikuwa hakuna kanisa. Kanisa ni hapo nyumbani tu peke yao. Na abudu na hawa jukuu zake basi. Kichoko anatandika mkeka unalala.
According to police officers, 2 of those rescued died at the scene while others succumbed while on the way to hospital. There are fears that many followers of this religious cult are still languishing in pain deep in the forest. A survivor recuperating at Malindi Sub-County Hospital alluded to the fears, intimating that her 3 children are still missing. She is said to have left Nairobi for upcountry in Mumias 3 weeks ago, only to be found unconscious in hospital without her children. Police reports show that a majority of the followers are from Western, Nyanza and the Coast region, begging the question why.
Mama yangu anaitwa Pamela Muhonja Mukalasinga, sister yangu anaitwa Morini Minza na mtoto wa sister yangu anaitwa Neema. Walikuja huku last year kutoka nyumbani. Na walipotoka nyumbani, mwisho kuwasiliana na mama ilikuwa Disemba. Alinipigia simu akiniambia yuko Malindi kwa Mackenzie.
Shida ni kubwa juu sasa ukisikia mkifika mahali mnataka kukuta penye yako wanatoroka. Na hii msitu ni kubwa. Sasa tunashindwa hata unaweza wapata ama walikula nini. Juu kama unaweza sikia watu wanatembea na utoroke watu. Sasa na tunaweza saidika aje.
And many families have started flocking the area searching for their loved ones.
Familia nyingi sasa zina vilio, wapendwa wao wamekufa, wengine nasikia wanazikwa, wengine wanafungwa kwa miti paka wakufe. Sasa hiyo itakuwa ni dhehebu la aina gani?
It is reported that since 2020, when the controversial preacher closed his church in Malindi, he relocated to Shakahola, where he took over 800 acres of land belonging to Chakama Ranch. It is alleged that most of his staunch followers bought pieces of land here and were located different sections. Inside the ranch, Mackenzie has constructed a dam with a capacity of 30,000 cubic meters of water with the intention of supplying water to every homestead within the ranch.
Ukichimba dam kubwa kama hiyo, kuna vitengo tofauti vya serikali ambavyo lazima nivijue. Kuna NEMA lazima ifike pale, ifanye assessment, uone kweli hapa huu mradi hautaleta shida. Kwa hivyo je, yeye alikamilisha vitengo hivyo vyote vya kuona kwamba ana uwezo wa kutengeneza damu yeye mwenyewe kama mtu?
There are no schools, hospitals, nor even churches within the area.
Yeye alienda nje ya Malindi. Tusijue kwamba alienda polepole akaenda zake akaenda Chakama. Kwa hivyo kule ni kama hideout. Lakini mambo hayo yote ambayo yamejiri sasa yamejitokeza kwamba kumbe alikuwa amehamia kule na kuendeleza ile mipango yake ambayo ni dini ambayo ni katili.
2 more bodies were also recovered Tuesday morning, according to local administration officers, leading to a total of 10 people who have so far died from the deadly religious doctrine. Homicide detectives and officers from the government chemists are yet to visit the area for exhumation of the bodies buried in shallow graves. Police are also on the lookout for more suspects believed to be within the apex of the leadership structure of the doctrine and are still brainwashing followers of the Good News International Church and luring them into fasting till death. Mackenzie and 6 of his supporters were arraigned on Monday and will be detained for 2 weeks.
Suspects 1 to 7 to remain in police custody for 14 days pending the completion of the investigations. 30 days is too much. So you take 14, complete your investigations.
Kevin Mutai, NTV, in Kilifi.
Suspects number 8 to 14 to remain in police custody for only 7 days for the same reason. We'll mention the matter on the 2nd of May 2023.
And healthcare services across 6 counties are set to be paralyzed from this Wednesday morning as healthcare workers embark on a go-slow following delayed salaries for the month of March. The county heads on their part say they have not received money from the national government, thus they are unable to pay the healthcare workers, as Helen Aura reports.
In less than 24 hours, health services across Kisumu, Mombasa, Vihiga, Bomet, Nyandarua and Nyamira counties are set to be affected following a go-slow by health workers. Initially, 12 counties had given notice for a go-slow, but 6 counties have since managed to pay their workers.
These other counties have not paid the salaries and have not limited statutory deductions. That is Kisumu County, Mombasa County, Nyamira County, Bomet County, Nyandarua County and Vihiga County.
In as much as some counties are decrying lack of funds, the medics are questioning why certain counties have managed to pay health workers while others are struggling. On their part, counties say they are doing the best they can.
We have a reconciliation committee that is at the moment is engaging these unions
on seeing how we can mitigate and lessen the pressure and the suffering that our health workers are going through.
The health workers now want the government to heed to their demands and prioritize them the same way teachers and police officers who are in the same essential workers bracket have been cushioned.
Hao ambao hawajalipwa wanaondoka, hawaondoki, hawaendi kazi kesho kwa sababu nyumba zimefungwa, watoto wamefukuzwa shule, hawana chakula, hawana fare, ni wagonjwa hawezi kwenda hospitali. How do you expect them to go and work?
Further, the unions want the national government to conduct sensitization campaigns so as to prevent increased cases of cholera that are being witnessed across the country. Helen Aura, NTV.
All right, thanks, Helen, for that report. I want us to just take a very quick look at what's been making headlines in the dailies before we get into our conversation this morning. And we're going to begin with the Daily Nation. This is what we have on the front page of Daily Nation. 72 hours of road carnage. And that's just what's been happening in the country. 6 students traveling home for the school holidays yesterday became the latest casualties on our roads just hours after 16 others lost their lives separately in Taita Taveta, Muranga and Nakuru. The cabinet directed the concerned players to act to curb the crashes. But must it always have to come to this for action to be taken? You can see the map there. These are the number of people, the numbers of lives that have been lost, at least in the past 72 hours. I have 4 who already died in Nakuru, 6 in Naivasha, 2 in Muranga, 10 in Taita Taveta County. That's a full report page report that we're going to get in the Daily Nation. I won't believe this is on the 4th page of the Daily Nation. Let me see. Let's see if we can get to that paper right now to see what else it says, because this is a growing concern, especially among people who travel, and it's not a very good story here. So let's see. Yeah, there you have it. It's actually on page 7 of the Daily Nation. Roads of terror as 22 perish in accident, and you see the faces there overwhelmed with grief, relatives of those who've died in accidents, really trying to find out what is the problem. Transport stakeholders saying most accidents are caused by recklessness, speeding, overloading, and the use of unroadworthy vehicles. But must we always reach here for any action to always be taken? That's the report. You can find it on the 7th page of the Daily Nation. All right, let me move forward to see what else we have. And all right, so on the 2nd page, Kenyan arrested in Ghana with 41 million worth of cocaine. That's a Kenyan woman who's currently in custody in Ghana for allegedly attempting to smuggle 11.04 kilograms of suspected cocaine. That's about worth 41 million shillings. The 35-year-old woman, identified as Mary Njeri, was arrested at the Kotoka International Airport in Accra on the 15th of April. And a statement from Ghana's Narcotics Control Commission said the woman was arrested after a routine check at the arrival hall after disembarking from a South African Airways flight from Nairobi to Accra via Johannesburg. You can get that report on the 2nd page of the Daily Nation. Also, Kenyan on mission to conquer the Everest. This is a story by Pius Maundu, and Nation Media Group and UAP Old Mutual among the organizations sponsoring Faith Mwende's expedition. She has honed her hiking skills over the years. Dr. Mwende now feels confident enough to climb the Everest. That's the highest mountain on the planet. Will she be able to do this? We're certainly rooting for her as Kenyans. You can get that full report as well on the Daily Nation. Treasury now seeks solace in new Eurobond as debt crisis deepens. The National Treasury is targeting to issue a new Eurobond to manage next year's maturity of 270 billion 10-year bond, exposing a deepening debt trap as the government continues kicking the can down the road. faced with the stark reality of handling the large maturing loan amid highly ballooned debt servicing cost in recent years and the country's highly weakened local currency against the US dollar, the Treasury has opted for another Eurobond, yet again putting off a chance to confront the worsening debt situation. You can see the picture there of the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Njuguna Ndung'u. All right, this is a full report. It's about the state of the economy in the country. And remember, there's a lot of conversation that has been happening around this. The total debt already as a country, we've hit 9.182 trillion in January. And this is projected to reach 9.41 trillion by June. Okay, to some politics here on the 5th page of the Daily Nation. Some development. Azimio rejects House led by partisan talks. That's the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition Party, who've opposed a motion by National Assembly Majority Leader Kimani Ichung'wah seeking to create a bipartisan committee in the House and vowed to resume their weekly mass protests starting next week. Remember, they actually promised that. The coalition that is led by Raila Odinga has accused the Kenya Kwanza House leadership of failing to show good faith in the entire process and presenting the motion without consulting their leaders in Parliament. In a statement read by Wiper Democratic Movement Party leader Kalonzo Musyoka yesterday, Azimio insisted that it will only participate in a process outside the House in what they say is in view of the structures of debate in Parliament. So this is the latest development with regard to that bipartisan talks that have been fronted by players from the political divide. So this is what is happening now, and the coalition says it's going to resume its weekly mass protests starting next week as negotiations stall. They said right after the holy month of Ramadan, that's when they will continue with that. Okay, that's what we'll be trying to monitor as well. On the 6th page, very quickly as well, governors call for talks to avert medic strike. This is another big issue that's happening in the country right now. Governors have called for talks with county healthcare workers to avert an imminent strike that is scheduled to start today. The Council of Governors Health Committee Chairman Muthomi Njuki has pleaded with the healthcare workers to reconsider their decision to down tools, saying most devolved units are operating under financial constraints. That's the Tharaka Nithi governor, who also said that the strike by the healthcare workers would only make the already fragile situation worse. And he went on to say, and I quote, our urge to the national government is that we must have an engagement that is for prosperity. If we decide to upscale to 5,000 with an additional 500 to the NHIF, then let's have a sustainability plan beyond 3 years. And so far, what do we know about this story is that healthcare workers in 12 counties have already issued a strike notice last week over their delayed salaries and poor management of health services at the county level. So what will happen? Will there be a resolution to that dispute? That's what we'll be trying to see today as well as we look at that development. I think very quickly as well, just lastly on the Daily Nation, is the SRC unveils bonus plans for public service workers. Another report showing more than half underperformed. That's the SRC, who's rolled out a framework for awarding public service workers with bonuses up to double their salaries should they exceed their performance targets. And all right, finally, MPs demand forensic audit of the 15 billion fertilizer scheme. It's a parliamentary committee that has given Auditor General Nancy Gathungu 30 days to conduct a forensic audit into the 15 billion set aside for the fertilizer subsidy program and report to the National Assembly. These funds were allocated to the Ministry of Agriculture in Supplementary Budget 1 for the 2022-2023 financial year that was approved by the House last month, but procurement was done by the Kenya National Trading Corporation, a parastatal under the Ministry of Investments, Trade and Industry. Now, yesterday, the members of the Public Accounts Committee of the National Assembly, which is chaired by nominated MP John Badi, said they took the decision on Monday this week based on suspicion of embezzlement of funds, fraud, and money laundering. That's what we're also following up on to see how that also pans out with regard to what's happening on the same. On the Business Daily, this is what's making headlines on the front page. State takes aim at big telcos with fresh dominance rules. Now, the government will raise the threshold for telecoms firms to be declared dominant to more than half of the gross turnover of the entire market, strengthening its focus on big tech companies. A government-backed ETIL has pushed a government-backed bill has pushed the limit for dominance from 25% of the relevant gross market, finding it at par with that set by the Competition Authority of Kenya. Just adjacent to that, experts also want KRA to set tax targets to curb budget woes, and Stanchart loans to sister bank rises to 83 billion shillings, as well as the government makes U-turn on SIM cards hawking ban. That is, the government is set to reverse a ban on SIM card hawking under proposed amendments to the Kenya Information and Communications Act. The draft changes, if adopted, will allow the agents of telcos to sell SIM cards to customers from any points. And on Taifa Leo, it's basically what we've just covered on the Daily Nation with regards to the political developments. Raila amruka Ruto, and it says muungano wa Azimio umejiondoa katika mazungumzo wa maridhiano bungeni ukisema serikali haina nia njema. And that's just what's the latest by Azimio kujiondoa katika mazungumzo. Raila akisema Azimio itashiriki mazungumzo nje ya bunge ambayo yatahusu maswala manne peke yake. All right. This is the East African, which covers basically that publication between the April 15th and April 21. Anatomy of Graft, the web of corruption, wastage and neglect in Tanzanian public sector agency, threatening to taint Samia's legacy ahead of the 2025 polls, but she has stepped up to slay the dragon. This is on page 4 and 5. It's all about what's happening in Tanzania right now. Pages 4 and 5, it gives you a full report of what really is happening, and that spotlight on the government officials colluding with some parties to perpetrate graft, exploiting weaknesses in revenue collection and recording. And it gives you a full idea of exactly what it talks about when it says about the anatomy of corruption in Tanzania, and what the president of Tanzania, Samia Suluhu, is really doing with regard to what is happening there. Rwanda migrant deal now covers non-asylum seekers. Kigali has the option to deport relocated individuals who don't raise protection claim. That's still on the East African. And also 200 million payout for Somalia mission casualties. At least 3,500 troops from Kenya, Uganda, Burundi and Ethiopia have died in Somalia over the past 16 years. And finally, let me just wind up on this as well. Congo's countdown to election day, a hot potato, that's what they say. It's just 8 months to that definitive presidential election in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The exact number of candidates or actual contenders is not yet known. Not even the election date has been set. But President Felix Tshisekedi may well know that his biggest opponent is the insecurity in the East. We might just touch a little bit on that as well when we do have our conversation. But I want us to get to our discussion this morning, and it's all about what's happening in Sudan. I want us to have this look at this report first. And the Sudanese army and a rival paramilitary force that have been battling the past 4 days for control of the country have agreed to a 24-hour ceasefire. Now, this came after U.S. top diplomat Antony Blinken urged warring factions to ensure the safety of civilians. The violence, which erupted on Saturday, raged for a 4th day, with the death toll increasing to at least 200 people and another 1,800 injuries. Let's have a look at that report.
Explosions rocked the Sudanese capital Khartoum as fighting that has claimed nearly 200 lives entered the 4th day despite growing international calls for an end to hostilities. The Sudanese army and the rapid support forces have agreed to a 24-hour ceasefire starting 6 p.m. Tuesday. Mohamed Hamadan Dagalo, the head of the rapid support forces, said they agreed to a ceasefire to ensure safety of civilians. Earlier in the day, United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken said he had spoken to leaders of rival armed forces in Sudan and urged an immediate ceasefire. The United Nations says 200 people have been killed since the fighting began on Saturday. More than 1,000 people have been injured. Many hospitals in Khartoum remain out of service, and medical personnel have been unable to reach healthcare facilities.
We are calling, of course, on both sides to allow access for aid workers, humanitarian aid workers, and to allow evacuations. We also we strongly request both sides to respect the need to protect UN agencies.
Millions of Sudanese in the capital and in other major cities have been hiding in their homes, caught in the crossfire as the two forces pounded residential areas with artillery and airstrikes and engaged in gun battles in the streets.
The last few days have been pretty much all of us just staying inside, indoors, and trying to keep our sanity intact. Bombardments usually start around 4 a.m. and they continue on for a few hours, but today they haven't stopped.
Residents in the embattled city are hoping that the ceasefire will ease human suffering.
And just to give you a little bit of context into what is happening in Sudan, it has been days of violence resulting in the deaths of, like what we've just had, at least 180 people, with many more left wounded. The fighting represents the latest crisis in the North African nation, which has contended with numerous coups and periods of civil strife since becoming independent in 1956. And it all revolves around infighting between two rival groups, the Sudanese army and a paramilitary group known as the RSF, or the Rapid Support Forces, since a coup in the country in 2021, which ended a transitional government put in place after the fall of longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir 2 years earlier. Sudan has been run by the army, with coup leader General Abdel Fattah Burhan as the de facto ruler. Now, following Bashir's ouster, the political transition was supposed to result in election by the end of 2023, with Burhan promising a transition to civilian rule. General Burhan and General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, who's commanding the RSF, are now locked in a power struggle that turned violent on the 15th of April. And since then, members of the RSF and the Sudanese army have engaged in gunfights in the capital Khartoum as well as elsewhere in the country. And over the course of 3 days, the violence has continued to spiral. Fighting also raged on Saturday, hours after this internationally brokered truce was supposed to have come into effect, as forces loyal to the dueling generals battled for key locations in the capital and accused each other of violating that ceasefire. We're still trying to get more information of really how the situation is with regards to that ceasefire. It was supposed to last for 24 hours. That's about 16 hours GMT. We're going to give you a calculation of exactly what time it is with regards to our East African time right now, and really what that situation looks like. But to have this conversation, I'm not alone in studio. I am joined on right on my immediate left is Dr. Edgar Githua, International Affairs, Security and Diplomacy Analyst. A very good morning. Thank you so much for joining us in studio this morning. We also have Dr. Peter Mwencha, who is the Senior Advisor at CATS International, that's Consumer Unity and Trust Society. Thank you so much. He's also the former CEO of the International Relations Society of Kenya, as well as Dr. Hannah Macharia, who's a peace and security expert this morning. Thank you for coming in this morning so that we can try and understand what is happening and really what's at stake, and does it even have any impact on the region? That's what we want to have a look at. So I want to get to just first your assessment of the situation in Sudan. I'm going to begin with you, Dr. Edgar. What do you make of it, of what is happening and all this new fighting that we're seeing from Saturday?
Thank you, Zainab. From my assessment, like you rightly put it, it's a power struggle between these two generals. And the key issue here is the transitional issue. There has been a trend whereby transitional governments, the people, the caretakers in the transitional government, are always thinking ahead and trying to calculate after the transition period what happens to their stake, what happens to their power, what happens to their role in the leadership of the country. And this being military-minded generals, of course, and with the backing of powerful militaries behind them. General Burhan has the Sudan Army and the RSF forces by Dagalo. there is going definitely to be an issue of who is going to be subordinate to who. What does the new power structure look like? So from where I sit, unless that is resolved, unless they get some form of guarantees, that is Dagalo and Burhan, on what role they play in the future Sudan, there's going to be continued violence coming from the two of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Dr. Mwencha, also, just looking generally at first of what really is happening there, what do you make of it?
Thank you, Zainab. What we're seeing is a dispute between two powerful generals,
right,
as Dr. Ali has put it, but also it's as a result of the sabotage by these two individuals of the democratic transition process. As you are aware, there's been two coups in Sudan. 2019, that got rid of the former president.
Right, Omar al-Bashir.
Yes.
And in
2021,
right,
that got rid of the civilian prime minister,
yes,
Hamdok. And now, at the point where the military was supposed to hand over power to the civilians, you're now seeing disagreements between them. And some people say this is by design. Some people say this is just a natural outcome of what has been mentioned, the inability of, to give them, or the lack of guarantees, or the insecurity that they have regarding the post-transition process. So that's how I can put it.
Right. And Dr. Anna, what do you make of it from where you sit?
Thank you, Zainab. I think I agree with my colleagues. But also coming at a time of Ramadan, it's really unfortunate situation. But also I think there is also an aspect of struggle for acceptability, because there is part of that gap. All this time we've not had the transition that the revolution expected. It has not come out. And if you look at RSF, is coming from a background of outcast, the periphery. So they are coming with an idea of the representing the marginalized, but coming to Khartoum is a mixture. So there is a struggle to create some sense of who is acceptable between us. But also there is the struggle of the two groups becoming subject to civilian authority, being a military both, and having transitional government. Then it means then they'll have to be subject to a civilian authority, which they are not really willing to, because it comes with a cost in terms of they have a lot of resources individually as groups. So who will give up? But also in terms of atrocities that have also been committed, giving up to be subject to it means some sense of justice needs to be looked at. And it might touch some of these individuals.
Right.
Yes.
And Dr. Edgar, I mean, when you're looking at, these people, these two generals have worked together in 2019 while overthrowing Omar al-Bashir. If this is a choice between two generals, is there any other option?
Well, you see now, I hear what you're saying. You see what happens. The agreement states that one of the problems with the peace agreements or peace accords is, especially if you look at the security sector reforms, one of the conditions going forward is that Dagalo's forces, the RSF, will be absorbed into the main army.
Correct. That's actually a bone of contention.
Yeah, that is the bone of contention. And so you realize, Burhan also realizes that Dagalo is bringing in between 70,000 to 100,000 soldiers into the army. So technically, even though they'll be absorbed, their loyalty will be to Dagalo and not to Burhan. And all those dynamics, from readings we find that they are better trained, that the RSF are better trained, better equipped. So there's a bit of...
Let me just go back a little bit.
Yeah.
If you can give us context, historical context into the formation of RSF.
RSF.
How did RSF come into, place?
Yeah. RSF, before al-Bashir, it's interesting, both Burhan and Dagalo are creations of al-Bashir. They've worked with al-Bashir before, the former president. So RSF came from the Janjaweed. So just to give a context, in Darfur region, when there was conflict on that side, al-Bashir created a militia group called the Janjaweed to go and deal with the locals who are agitating for space and liberation in that area. So
the ones they called the rebels.
Yeah, the rebels, yeah.
Right.
So the Janjaweed, quote unquote, this militia group is what al-Bashir utilized to quell or to commit violence in that side. So in 2013, he now formalized and created a structure around RSF and brought them into mainstream government, but gave them a separate command.
So this was a parallel military force.
Exactly.
Then.
It was, like, for example, if we take the Kenyan situation, like the GSU, and then you really arm them and give them good equipment. So Dagalo has been a law to himself for a very long time, operating under Bashir. So when their interests converged, we need to get rid of Bashir, Burhan and Dagalo cooperated.
Right.
When their interest converged in removing Hamdok, the prime minister, the interest converged. But now that Dagalo is being told to cede his group and let them join the main military, that's a problem now for him. I think the discussion from a purely monetary point of view becomes, will I control the same budget I was controlling? And then remember, RSF for the longest time has been accused of illegally mining Sudan's gold and working with Russians, you know, for a long time. So you're asking Dagalo to give up a small empire, which also has some economic implications for him. So you're taking away from him not only the military power, quote unquote, and also some economic power that he had before. So when you tell him to integrate his forces and the formula is not right, then there's going to be a problem.
Right.
So it is a clash of egos and also a clash of what do we get, what is in it for me after this.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of also influence in terms of political power
Exactly.
and economic power.
Correct.
All right. So we're going to come back and continue with this conversation. We've just began. We have to take a break on the show AM Live as a hashtag we're using this morning. Zainab Ismail at NTV Kenya, talk to us as we take a look at the situation there in Sudan. What do you make of it? Let's take that break. We're going to be back in a short while. All right, thank you for staying with us. You're watching AM Live on NTV as we try to just make sense of what is happening in Sudan and potentially any ramifications that it would have in the region. I am with Dr. Edgar Githua, who's International Affairs, Security and Diplomacy Analyst, Dr. Peter Mwencha, Senior Advisor, CARTS International, as well as Dr. Hannah Masharia, Peace and Security expert as well. Let me get to Dr. Mwencha on this particular issue. So we have these two generals commanding the army, the Sudanese army, and one commanding the paramilitary, you know, very powerful force, that's the RSF. So then the question would be, if this fighting is between these two generals, is it about ideology or is it just about power at this point?
Thank you, Zainab. This is clearly all about power. By their nature, military states have lack of legitimacy, so to speak. And in this case, what you're seeing is this lack of legitimacy then drives both of them to try and cover their space. And what you're seeing now is these fights for dominance, which have resulted in the current impasse that is happening.
Okay, Dr. Masharia, but you know, when we're looking at, I was trying to get the statements there that was sent out by the RSF commander, popularly known as Hemeti. And you know, he's saying that he's fighting for civilians against, you know, the army, which has been committing atrocities against the civilians. So he's saying that's his ideology, that first of all he's fighting Islamist radicals, and second of all he's fighting for democracy of that country. But the Sudanese army has, sort of refused those remarks, saying that that's not true and that that's spreading misinformation. So then I'm still going to back to that question. I'm going to ask you, is it about a sense of ideology from where you sit, or is it just back to an ego fight between these two men?
I think it's all about ego, but also I think what Medit is doing is trying to resonate with the revolution, and looking at what was the basis of revolution. It was access to basic things. It was the life was unbearable for the citizen, and now he's trying to attribute the failure of transition to Al-Burhan, because he's the one in charge of the security command. So he's attributing that failure of transition, and therefore for him to gain legitimacy of the majority is to say, I am standing in for the people, and in that way, because the government in this context have failed to get to transition. Second, he's also looking at himself in the context of where he's coming from. So he's not from Khartoum. He's from the outcast. So if we speak the language of democracy, and I want to deal with the problem, who is the military, then he's trying to find acceptability. Not really that he's resonating with the experiences of the people and the pain the people in the country are going through, but that will help him get more acceptance rather than being criticized as the one behind the atrocities, on one of the parties involved in the atrocities in the country. So I think it is creating a narrative that will help him rather than projecting himself as an entity seeking power. But in reality, it's actually a competition between two militaries, we want to call them, because essentially he has a rank in the Sudanese army, but he also has a rank in his rapid support force. So he has two ranks. So he's in this institution, but also he's on this other one. But he's creating a narrative to gain acceptability to the population that really needs to see the situation addressed.
Right.
Yes.
Dr. Gidua, then how does this violence, sort of fit into Sudan's already troubled past? What does it mean for Sudan, looking back at, all the coups that have happened and their revolution? It feels like the people of Sudan have always been in a state of revolution.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Zainab. Yeah, the way you've rightly put it, it paints a very bleak picture, actually, for democracy in Sudan, unless the people themselves, and by the people I'm talking about the citizens themselves, really reach deep into their resources, in which would come at very great cost, because they'll be caught between two military powers that do not want to let go. I've always theorized that it is dangerous when you let the military taste political power. When you involve any military anywhere and they taste the trappings that come with political power, controlling budgets and just having that say, it's very hard to get them back into the barracks. Some military leaders have even revolutionized or transitioned into civilians, where they remove their uniforms and claim now we've become civilians, but technically they still control arms of power. So looking at what you've asked, it paints it's going to be tough for Sudan really to get back into democratic rule, because there will be no solution without taking care of those two military entities in the country. Burhan has his followers, and there are quite many. And unfortunately, there are civilian leaders who both support Dagalo, Hemedi, and there are some who support Burhan. So they also have, these two generals also have some political backing and political legitimacy from civilians who want to benefit.
And what about the external forces as well? It feels like, with the kind of power that they both amass, is also because they're being supported by external forces and the resources that they need in the world.
Definitely. Burhan is being supported by Egypt, and Dagalo is being supported by United Arab Emirates, or so the stories go. So with external actors in any conflict, it becomes hard to get a local solution, because unless those two actors feel they have lacked support and are held accountable by external actors, it's not easy to stop the conflict. Egypt wants Burhan in power for their own purposes. They can work with him. They have bigger issues in the region to deal with, and they feel Burhan is the person to help them out. United Arab Emirates are trying to carve their space within Sudan, and Dagalo is their person. So with this external support, it becomes quite hard to solve that problem, because unless this external interference is gotten rid of, which is not easy, those two leaders will still feel we have a chance and we can solve it at the battlefield.
And just for context, is there actually, when we're talking about coups that have happened in Sudan, we did have one in 1958, that's right after the independence in 1956. We had one in 1969, we had another one in 1985, another one in 1989, another one in 2019, that's when we remember, with the ouster of Bashir, and then again another one in the 2021 coup. But then it feels again you know, the Sudanese people have always been in this particular state fighting for, you know, some sort of independence and civilian rule. But then you have this. And when we're looking back at what happened in 2019, it was quite shocking when they say that, you know, when the army said that the only reason why they did not hand over power to the civilian rule was the fact that they stepped in to avert a civil war. And this time, you know, Burhan was the chairperson of this transitional council. He was supposed to hand over power to a civilian, you know, to a civilian, that particular chairmanship. But that didn't happen. So then we're seeing, do you feel like we're seeing, you know, the same thing happening right now, that when there was already an agreement that was signed in December of 2022, and, you know, with all these things, that now that, you know, we expected an election to happen in Sudan this year, we're back to the same state. Dr. Mwencha.
Yeah, so actually you've put it in a very correctly. In 2019, what you saw when the people went out to the streets, there was crimes that were committed. A lot of the, almost 100, if not more, protesters were shot. And majority of these protesters were allegedly killed by the RSF.
Right.
Yeah, so the military at that time did not come out forcefully, and it was seen to be on the side of the protesters, who were led by the Sudanese Professional Association. And that's part of the problem you're having now. Of like I said, if you listen to what Hemeti has been saying at the moment, he's trying to create that legitimacy because he knows he has a deficit with the civilian population, based on what happened not just in 2019, but even way back in Darfur. So he's trying to create a narrative to paint himself as a champion of the population. But at the same time, he's not the only one who is suffering from the legitimacy deficit. The army itself, based on what they did in 2021 by carrying out the coup against the civilian prime minister, they are also now trying to, you know, engineer an environment for them to either stay on or for them to be, you know, create a position of a powerful, still be in a position of power even after the post-coup transition. And you're seeing this in the framework agreement that that is supposed to guide the transition to civilian rule. The military is putting in a lot of conditions for that, which are not acceptable, not just by the civilians, but also by the international community. And this is what now people are saying, is this conflict engineered by design to sort of like sabotage the process, or is it this just that we need to figure out how to accommodate these two people in the post-civilian or sort of post-military rule phase? So what we are having right now is an agreement which for the military would mean them ceding power to the civilians, and it's given what has happened in the past, many of them are very uncomfortable. But not just what has happened in the past, even as we speak, there's the military is what you call involved in business. So they have a lot of business interests, and same with the paramilitary force, who are also allegedly mining gold and doing other types of businesses. And for that reason, then it becomes very clear from a governance of the economy. You can see handing over power, and that was part of the, according to analysts, that was part of what engineered or precipitated the coup in 2021, because some of these conditions were not acceptable to both groups. So it will be interesting to see how you find, how you resolve these issues that clearly are not going to go away soon.
Right.
Yeah.
Dr. Macharia, when we're looking at that particular issue that, you know, suddenly is coming out quite strongly, with the issue of integrating the RSF into, you know, the mainstream army, does this, or does the stability of Sudan hinge on that particular matter?
Okay, I think it's not just the integration, but integration with the ranks. And that would really make it more a bit complicated.
Yeah.
because which rank would you now have to either reform and create ranks for RSF for them to be able to fit? But this is not one of the conditions. And for me, the key concern is, will this reintegration come with demilitarization physically, so that you can retrain? Because you're looking at RSF coming from a militia, Janjaweed, which was devils on horseback. And they were actually real devils in terms of the atrocities committed.
Right.
So you're looking at a group that has a very serious concern in its terms of its formation. You're looking at a group that has participated as mercenaries in Yemen. So it has a history that's of various concern if we have to integrate them into the military. So for me, the condition that should actually be very clear is security sector reforms. And what do you do with the integration? Because both of them need serious reforms in terms of the whole security sector. Are they going to be demilitarized from their minds? Because these people, their solution is use of force. Because if you have to talk about the peace and security of this country, then it's not just about integration. It's about having security addressed from a human security perspective. What was the concern of Sudanese population? What are the atrocities that have happened since revolution? Does the integration address that? And if it doesn't, then what are the primary concerns should drive the current leader in the military, but also the leader of RSF? Is it their positions or the needs of the citizens? Because integration itself does not really solve the primary concern in the country. So we need to go beyond saying integrate them to the military. Yes, we have. So what after that? Will the nature and the practices of this RSF change? If it doesn't change, it doesn't stop us from having another coup in few years. Even if we have civilian transition, the characters are still there. So we need to address the whole security sector reform beyond saying we've integrated them.
And even with those reforms, then there's the issue of accountability as well. So many people have died in those different coups that have happened, and mini revolutions that have happened in Sudan, but no one really has ever been held accountable to any of those atrocities up until now. Is that something that creates some sort of tension or concerns within those who are holding power right now?
Yes, it does, because democratic transitions or democratic governance, if you have to heal societies, then we can't close our eyes to issues of atrocities committed. We have to bring people to justice. People have to feel the atrocities and the unfair treatment subjected to them, not for any crimes they commit. And even if they did wrong the government at the time, then they should also be tried. So I think that there's that also fear from the military, from this coming from RSF, that if we move to transition, there will be questions of justice. And if you have to ensure justice, it means some of the members who are part of the military and RSF will have to give an account for whatever happened, especially 30th June, where it had a lot of people killed. Right now, we are hearing stories of rape, which is a crime against humanity. We don't know the experiences happening to women right now. So it has to go beyond transitioning to holding an election, that we cast our vote. That will not make people in Sudan feel my needs are addressed. Even if the economy grew, there still be somebody grieving because of an atrocity that was committed. So there has to be accountability. Anybody who committed atrocity, for that country to heal, they need to be brought to account. So that you create an end to a narrative of atrocities have been committed since 1958, like you've accounted, to now nobody has ever been brought to account. this transition was an opportunity for Sudan to have election, but now it is looking very far off. But we do still hope it will come, and as it comes, then let's ensure the wounds are healed, but justice is given.
Right.
Yes.
And Dr. Gidwa, when we're talking about some of these aspects of, accountability, let's talk about the humanitarian issue right now. And a lot is happening, and a lot is not documented at this point because, first of all, they're facing power cuts. There's no electricity. Those who are running, with power are just using generators, which are also running out of diesel. According to some of the informations that we're getting, people don't have phones. Most people, those phones have gone off. Food is also scarce. People are running out of food at this point. And, the airports, there's no flying into Sudan at this point because then mediators cannot get in. And remember I think it was on Monday, you had the UN mission, that's the World Food Program under the UN saying that, look, we are not bringing food to Sudan because three of their staff members were killed, their aircraft was damaged. So now you have that crisis, and it's already a country that has been stricken by drought. And they were really depending on food aid. Now this is another big issue that is facing the people of Sudan at this point. So when we're looking at the impact and the humanitarian crisis that these people are facing, what does that mean?
I mean, thanks, Zainab. I think it paints a very dire picture because, like you rightly put it, with a lockdown, quote unquote, of the country's airspace, number one, WFP and all these humanitarian organizations cannot fly in. They're also not guaranteed of their security, and they have been on record saying that. So creating that humanitarian corridor would have been very, very important. Now, the current ceasefire, ideally ceasefire agreements are supposed to facilitate a de-escalation of issues and to allow the wounded to be evacuated from the streets. Because the other day I was watching in the news, and the Sudan doctors, the doctors in in Sudan, are complaining that we don't even have medicine in the country. Our hospitals are running out of medicine. We can't take care of the wounded and the people who are hurt. So that humanitarian crisis is going to escalate gravely unless something drastic really happens. I believe what is required right now is serious calls to these two parties, especially the warring parties, General Burhan and General Dagalo. They need to tell their forces to stand down, at least for longer than the 24-hour ceasefire.
And by the way, just an update on that is a fact that what we understand and the information that we're getting right now is that just hours after an agreement to that ceasefire, that 24-hour ceasefire, which went into effect 6 p.m. local time in Sudan, according to witnesses, it crumbled later on, and then now we saw that the forces back fighting. So what does that mean then? It paints quite a bad picture.
It's true. Initially, what happens in conflict situations where two warring parties are of almost equal military strength, they really believe they will not solve the problem diplomatically. They want to settle it at the battlefield, and especially when Dagalo feels he has the momentum and the impetus among his forces. So he also doesn't want to lose he wants to take advantage of the Sudan military's vulnerabilities and weaknesses. That's why you're finding him very persistent in escalating the situation from a military perspective. But back to the ceasefire, if the ceasefire would hold, which now you've confirmed that it has not held, it paints a very dire picture, because it means the humanitarian crisis will only escalate. Many more atrocities, like what Dr. Mashari was saying, a lot of atrocities will continue being committed and nobody will document them. I mean, people will not be evacuated. The wounded who would have probably been saved in the hospitals will not be taken care of. And eventually, from where I sit, what I see happening is that the citizens will be pushed to a corner. Until now, they will, when you push someone to a corner and they feel they have no option and dying is probably the only option, you might have people getting out en masse simply saying, we want this ceasefire. The citizens of Sudan, exactly, enough is enough. We don't care about Burhan, we don't care about Dagalo. If you're killing us.
But isn't it tiring for the people of Sudan who've always been on the streets fighting? In 2019, they went and camped outside the army headquarters.
It is true.
And that's what led to more than 100 people being killed by the army.
But it appears to be the language that society has normalized or constructed itself into believing, because the citizens have realized that they take the power into their own hands, but they eventually get things done, but at very great cost. Meaning there are over 100 lives lost in every protest and all that. Because from where I sit, unless Burhan and Dagalo see reason, unless sanctions, the threats of sanctions get them to the table to uphold a ceasefire, they'll continue this ceasefire, then someone abrogates it within 2, 3, 4 hours, because to their minds, so long as they are militarily equal, they will not agree to sit at the table to discuss. They will want to solve their issues at the battlefield and then get a decisive victory. Yeah.
Dr. Mwencha, let me still stay on that issue of the humanitarian crisis that we're facing. There are reports of things like, sexual assault on men and women, and also specifically, I was trying to get a statement here from the UN. They were talking about, the people who are trying to get help to the people of Sudan also being assaulted in those particular areas, especially those ones that have been captured, or not captured, but really where the intense fighting is happening. So then, when you're looking at this, and right now we're talking about 180 people who have been killed. The numbers have actually increased to at least 270 people. And this is according to the World Health Organization, who are citing Sudan's Ministry of Health Emergency Operations Center. So that number continues to increase by the day, and the humanitarian situation is worsening. What does that mean? Where does that leave the people of Sudan who really want, this change?
Let me put that into context. What's happening now is obviously a tragedy on all fronts, and it's basically affecting both diplomats of the international community who are based in Sudan, and also the local population. But if you go back, if I take you a bit back into history, the protests that happened in 2019 were precipitated by a dire economic crisis. If you look at what happened after the South Sudan broke off from what was then North Sudan, it took away most of the oil revenues from Sudan. And that then led to a downward spiral, which culminated in the protests of 2019. And then since then, one of the other things that precipitated the protest was the sanctions that the regime was facing. And to date, one of the arguments that has been given by the military for not being able to manage the situation has been the sanctions, because even when there was a civilian government, some of the sanctions were not lifted. So if you look, if you take that perspective, or you put that into perspective, and then look at what's happening currently, when you have already a civilian population that has been suffering from high food prices, insecurity, and basically now a lack of goods that are necessary. The current situation just exacerbates an already bad situation. And as long as this fighting continues, then you can imagine the kind of problems, or the kind of situation that not just the, like I said, not just the civilians, but even the international community that is currently in Sudan, lack of medicines in the hospital, people not being able to access water. And from the media reports, you're seeing people still stuck to where they are. I've seen clips of students stuck at the university, and this is just unacceptable. And that's why there's a lot of international pressure currently for them to agree to a ceasefire, so that people can help can come in.
But which apparently doesn't seem to hold, a ceasefire that continues to crumble.
Yeah, I've seen reports where people are trying to move from areas that are being bombarded, and these are civilian populations who are, as you've seen in the media, jets are flying in, bombing certain key facilities, and which are close to residential areas. So it's a very complex situation, because not much information is coming out, and it's behoves the two parties to come together and agree to a ceasefire.
Right.
Yeah.
And Dr. Macharia, when you're looking at that escalation of the situation, and there has been concerted calls by the international community, by the regional community, we have, you know, the AU Commission, we have IGAD, we saw the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, also make a statement on the same in Japan, just that was on Monday. We also did see the UK. And so there's a lot of effort in terms of trying to sort of come up with a truce between these two warring factions. So then the question is, because we are much closer to Sudan as well, right? Then is there a danger, you know, of, you know, the violence escalating? And then perhaps when you're looking at that situation, is there an impact that this crisis, if it continues to get worse, does it have any impact on the region?
Okay, yes, it does. Because of our proximity to the region. So one, if you look at from an economic and trade perspective, it does have an effect. Sudan is one country buys a lot of our tea. A lot of it we sell, quite a good number we sell to this country, and it's a time that we need more revenue. So a problem in that region, it really does affect us as a country. Second, it also affects us in terms of, you already have a debordered problem in the region, and that is terrorism. So a crisis in any other country will create a concern to the entire region. Because you already have another problem that's relating to terrorism, so any instability could create an opportunity for related activities. We also have issues of refugees. People are likely to cross borders. And as a country, we have hosted refugees pre-independence of South Sudan, the Greater Sudan as it was. We hosted refugees from then Sudan, and if the situation goes on, then it's likely to we are likely to see people crossing border to Kenya as refugees. So that is also becomes a concern for us. It will also have an impact on international trade. If we look at the Red Sea, part of it where it borders Sudan, 10% of international trade passes the region. Right. So an instability does not necessarily mean the trade ceases, but it does impact in terms of, it goes with a lot of caution. So we will still go, but it's to be very cautious. And also it does affect in terms of resources. Right now, you can see a lot of cargo that goes to that country. In case of any problem, what is the likely diversion? So it's likely to be our Jomo Kenyatta Airport, because it's the next largest. So any cargo going to that place, diversions are likely to come back, and that will affect the operation, because you really have to manage much more than what you constantly have to manage. So it really has an impact for us as a country. And I think it also gives us an opportunity, which we really need to take seriously, to address the situation before it escalates. Needs to put a lot of pressure on the two individuals. It's not about them, it's about the citizens of this country. Yet they may have interest, but at the end of the day, their interests are not resonating to a common person in Sudan. I listened to one of the lady yesterday, and she was saying it's very sad she cannot futuru, and she said, I would rather die from hunger than from bullets. So she would rather see I've tried to meet my basic needs, but I failed. But not because of individuals. Yeah, than individuals fighting for their own interests that has nothing to do with me at this moment. Right. Yes. Wow. So in essence, the whole situation does have impact in us, and we really need to take action. I'm glad there are a lot of actions. IGAD has made its take. AU, Peace and Security Council. as appointed envoys. We've seen the UN Security Council, a special meeting. We've seen the 3 countries in the United Security Council from Africa speaking. So I think there's a lot of activity. We've seen the president, the prime minister of Egypt, is talking about it. So I think the pressure need to continue regardless, and hope that the 2 generals, they'll be sent to see the situation from a different perspective, away from them, and speak the language of the Sudanese.
Right. And before we take a break, Dr. Gidhoa, still on that, before we lose that trail of thought, is the issue of this really escalating into something bigger. But there has been concern that perhaps with what Dr. Hannah Macharia talked about, this bodies, for example, because we're in Kenya, we're part of IGAD, which is our regional body, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. We know that they delegated the task to 3 presidents, which include President William Ruto of Kenya, the president of Djibouti, as well as the president of South Sudan, to sort of go there and try and mediate the talks between these 2 generals. There was also the AU Commission, which tasked the AU chairperson, Musa Ali Mahmad, to actually go there as well and try and see how they can be able to negotiate a ceasefire. But there have been, the concern is that these bodies are weak. Is that, a view that that our regional bodies do not have or possess the influence, the power to actually make things happen?
Yeah, thanks for putting it in context. You're very right. One of the problems of Africa's peace, mediation architecture is that some of the people tasked with mediating and dealing with some of these conflicts have vested interests in the conflict itself. For example, like you've rightly put, Sudan neighbors shares a border with South Sudan. All right, they already have their own issues. South Sudan and Sudan already have their issues because of agreements. Remember, the South Sudanese oil passes through Sudan all the way to Port Sudan. So if there's a problem in Sudan, South Sudan gets affected directly. So in terms of regional impact, one of the biggest casualties will be South Sudan. Because if this fighting and bombardments, for example, destroy the pipeline, that means now South Sudan cannot export its oil.
Right.
They share the revenue with Sudan. So that complicates. So telling President Salva Kiir to be one of the mediators, he's going to be very invested in terms of trying to get back peace in Sudan, because his country's lifeline depends on it. His country's economy depends on it. But then there's a bigger question to ask. Between Burhan and Dagalo, do we know of any who have had any issues with or any relationship with Salva Kiir? Sometimes in mediation, when you bring in the neighbors to mediate a conflict, there is the risk of complexity, because these people have past histories and past relationships.
Right.
So you could be sending Salva Kiir, who can speak their language, speaks Arabic, he'll be able to talk to them. But from an economic perspective, is he closer to Burhan? Is he closer to Dagalo? It will also give him, on the flip side of the coin is that he's having relationships with these leaders gives him an upper hand in terms of getting to be able to talk to them to de-escalate the situation. Now, back to the bigger picture. African Union has already appointed, and Musa Faki has offered to go and mediate, but he made a statement and said, but their airspace is closed. I cannot go, I cannot get there. So his hands are tied. African Union, by nature, when they're mediating this, they require funding, which most of the time they do not have within themselves. So we are still looking for external actors, the EU or somebody bigger out there.
The UN mission to Sudan.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Someone needs to fund this. So what makes the IGAD and African Union disadvantaged at this particular point is the funding. Okay, it will be the issue of logistical support to go and just fund that whole process.
Right.
So using the word that they are weak may not be, they're incapacitated to an extent. Logistically, they're incapacitated because they don't have the finances most of the time to undertake some of these initiatives. Because even if they go and start mediating and an agreement comes out, we need to have guarantors to this peace process. who is going to fund the process? And from past peace agreements in Africa, we have realized the implementation phase becomes the hardest because the people who funded kind of grow tired and they pull back, and then the peace agreement degenerates.
Right.
So I would wish African Union the best, and IGAD, of course, we wish them the best in all this, but they need funding to do this, to sustain it, because it's going to be a long drawn process.
Right.
It will not be a cut and paste kind of situation. It's going to be a long drawn process.
All right. And I want us to take a break on that note, but we will be continuing this conversation when we come back after this short break, and maybe just touch on a little bit on the situation in DRC. Remember, that's a conversation we've been having for the past couple of weeks on what's happening there. We'll just have a look at just a bit of developments there with regard to that situation, and then we will be winding up on that note. So let's take that quick break. We're going to be back. Stay with us. All right, thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching AM Live as we try and assess the situation in Sudan, trying to make sense of that, and also what is at stake, not just for the people of Sudan, but the people of those within the region and the continent as well, and of course the competing interests from external, places as well, and external factors that are also playing part of this particular fighting. And Dr. Mwencha, just looking at this the transition that has been fronted and the fact that it continues to hit a snag, so then what does it mean for the chance of democracy being restored in Sudan? What will it take?
I'd look at that from two perspectives. The situation in Sudan and the wider context. Military states by their nature are very difficult to transition back to democracy. Once you've let the genie out of the bottle, so to speak, it's very difficult to put it back. If you look at countries like Egypt, which is next to Sudan, underwent a civilian transition, and you saw what happened. The military stepped back and got rid of the civilian, the elected president. Same thing is happening now in West Africa. You're seeing a number of military coups across the region. And if you go even to Asia, countries like Thailand, Myanmar are also experiencing these coups, whereby now civilian governments are being removed through military force. So having that perspective, then if you look at Sudan with their history of coups, this is just the latest iteration or the latest of a series of coups that really paint a very dark picture of a situation in the country. And it therefore behoves the international community to really try and find a solution as to how the military will be accommodated going forward. And this framework agreement, and like I said before, the framework agreement is clear in terms of how this should be done. But again, the military has put its objections there, and it means that it's very difficult. They need to bridge these differences, because if the military is not guaranteed, or there are no guarantees given to the military leaders, then it's going to be very difficult to see how they will agree to go through this process.
Let me hold on to that, because with that framework, the agreement framework, there was something very important on that, and it was the economic situation. I know that after the 2021 coup, you had the United States, you have the World Bank, you had Germany and other allies who froze aid packages to Khartoum collectively, according to reports, totaling to about billions of dollars, maybe about $700 million was to come from Washington alone. So that's billions of dollars that was supposed to go to Khartoum. Now, the release of the funds was conditioned on the restoration of civilian rule, but implementing the framework agreement was expected to unlock much of the aid funds the people of Sudan really need to cope with, the issues of soaring of food prices and all these things, that economic shocks that they're also facing. But this is, this postponement of this agreement, this framework, then means that there's a huge setback for the economy of Sudan. How do they even move from that? And
that's actually the paradox that this process is facing, because the international community has set prerequisites or preconditions for them to fund or to support this process.
Right.
But then the players then on the two sides, or the two protagonists in the current conflict, are getting support from other quarters internationally. So if you look at the Sudanese armed forces, there are countries which are supporting the leader of the armed forces. If you look at the paramilitary force, there are also countries which are supporting him and are funding him. So then if you come to the civilian side of it, nobody is funding them. And therefore this creates what I said, the crisis of legitimacy, even for the civilian administration. And as you saw in 2021, that's why the military, one of the frustrations the military was expressing, and one of the reasons they gave for getting rid of the civilian government, was that it was politicking too much and it was not doing enough to improve the economic situation in the country. But how do you do that when funds have been frozen, and when the two people or the two groups that you're supposed to be dealing with have a way of generating income, of getting funding, and therefore they have really no interest for coming to the table.
So then the civilians, the people of Sudan, are the ones who are left.
Yeah.
Right. Dr. Macharia, you know, economic situation really bad. There was supposed to be debt forgiveness as well as part of this, as a condition to transitioning to civilian rule. The economic situation in Sudan is really getting worse.
Very true, Zainab. If you look at the genesis of the revolution, was actually access to basic needs because of the prolonged period of dictatorship, corruption in the country, and also indictment of the then president because of the crimes committed in Darfur. And because of that, you saw the U.S. government list Sudan as one of the countries supporting terrorism, and that significantly affected investment, because by that label itself, then you want to keep away for both diplomatic relationship with the U.S. government, so you find a lot of investment draw away. Then with the restoration, with the transition government that was created of Hamda, then what you found, there was quick response from international community from an economic perspective. And what you found is quickly change of the label of the country in terms of association with terrorism. Then there was a promise from the Paris Club to give a lot of funding for development. You have a lot of international body quickly going back to the country to support the civilian, which really gave a sense of hope to the population that we can actually come back. But then the coup now changes the narrative again, which creates a very desperate situation for the citizen in this country. And like my colleague said, for these two individuals, they don't feel the pinch of the cost of living. In terms of the economic stake they hold, even with the literal revenue that is being collected, they're still able to run their life normally as there is no crisis. But what happens to a student in school? What happens to a medical doctor? What happens to a farmer? Even if I produce, where will I get my product to the market? Right now with the crisis in the airport, fighting who controls the airport. So I think it is very dire condition for the citizen. It's a very serious humanitarian crisis, and the individuals really need to, if I put it, to be humane and think about the citizens who've been living in very troubling condition for very many years, from accessing to basic need. That pushes the country even to attaining the sustainable development goals to very far in terms of hope of getting to the bare minimum. And for individuals who had hope of coming back to their country, let's say citizens from Darfur who left because of the conflict from 2003 to 2020, there were hope of now we can go back home. But you can see that hope is trashed. That hope of exercising your civic right as a citizen, it's already appear very dim. And the need to restore stability in this country, it's very critical. To really give the citizen in this country that there is hope in democracy, because they are fighting to have that say. And so restoration is really key. It will bring back a lot of investment. It will bring back a lot of economic activities that are needed in the country. So if you look at the building of the port of the port that is being built,
right,
in the Red Sea, with all these crises, even if we build that port, how will we end up using it? So even the external actors, whichever side they are supporting, they need to look at the bigger picture. Yes, I've put my investment, but at what point does it come back? Yeah.
All right. And Dr. Gidua, just trying to look at the economic impact of this whole thing, which is going to be quite huge. When you're talking about the port, by the way, just when was it? December? Let me get that correct. It was just the 7th. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah, sorry. It was December last year. Sudan actually signed a $6 billion agreement with a consortium led by the United Arab Emirates, AD Ports Group, and Invictus Investment to develop that new port and economic zone in the Red Sea. So this implication, you can imagine, is not just going to affect the people of Sudan. This is a huge implication considering the economy, how big the UAE economy is. Exactly. So there's a huge implication there.
Yeah, you're right. There's a huge implication. And like my colleagues have rightly said, the moment Sudan was labeled a terrorist supporting nation, in history, that affected their credit rating in the international market to even attract investments or get loans from, international actors out there. It is no wonder that the UAE are very keen in supporting Dagalo, because like you've said, they are seeing their investment going down the drain.
Yeah.
And they are not so sure that if Burhan holds on to power, eventually becomes strong in the country and is left in charge, whether the investment is going to be safe. So there is a regional and continental ramification, because the Red Sea is a very crucial transit point for goods. Remember, like I was saying, South Sudan exports its oil through a pipeline all the way to the Red Sea through Sudan. So there's a regional economic ramification. Now, if you look at the people who have invested, or rather the economies that are getting affected with this conflict in Sudan, we have South Sudan, by extension Kenya and Uganda, because Kenya controls, quote unquote, controls the banking sector in South Sudan. We've invested very heavily. We have Equity Bank, we have KCB Bank, the financial sector, Stanbic Bank. Kenyans, the financial sector of South Sudan, Kenyans actually control it.
Yeah.
And a lot of their revenue, South Sudan is a rentier country, meaning they rely a lot on their oil revenues. So that oil revenue is going all the way to Sudan. So if this conflict escalates, there's a huge regional economic implication.
All right.
Yeah.
Dr. Mwencha, I just want to get your parting shots, because we're also, running out of time. We'll not be able to touch on the issue of DRC. But just as we move forward, what do you hope to perhaps see from where you sit in terms of that situation? It really isn't getting better. Like I said, the numbers have increased to about 270 people reportedly who've been killed so far, with hundreds others who have also been wounded at this point. There have been, the concerted calls for ceasefire, but that really hasn't borne any fruit yet. What do you expect perhaps to be able to see? What are some of the key, ways perhaps those leaders can be able to resolve this, without causing much more harm to the civilians?
Thank you. First of all, an immediate ceasefire, which allows help and aid to come in, and also which allows some type of normalcy to resume, so that people are able to get basic necessities, and so that also an environment that allows for dialogue can be created. So yes, immediate cessation of hostilities, again allowing for us resumption of dialogue, but that then would also mean that a critical look at this framework agreement from not just from an international perspective, but also within the country. There's a lot of concerns by the civil society and by some of the groups, civilian groups, which do not really have confidence in this agreement, and they feel like that it doesn't address all the issues that, you know, historical issues and that have led us to this point. So there's perhaps, I know this would be, many people would not be comfortable with going back to the process or reopening this agreement, but there's really need to critically look at this and also bring a broader parts of the civilian population into the process, because quite a number of them stepped back from the process because of the challenges of implementing and just like the lack of confidence in the process. And also finally, just looking at the current global environment, then you can appreciate why Sudan is in the position it is in. And therefore, there's need for more concerted effort, especially economic support for the country, because I can foresee this happening again if you put a civilian government into place that really cannot meet the aspirations of the population.
All right.
So having a government, a civilian government, if we get to that point where there's a civilian government, then these economic issues that have precipitated the protests and the lack of confidence in governments, successive governments, need also to be addressed.
All right. Dr. Macharia, let me get your parting shots on the situation and really what you feel needs to be done.
I think a ceasefire is very key, because even when we have envoys appointed to handle the situation, it is impossible. As long as there are gunshots, you can't talk when you're first listening what's happening behind you. So I think primarily we need a ceasefire to it's goodwill, even from the two individuals. It's part of saying, yes, we are interested to see our country different. That's for themselves is a sign. But the fact of saying I have to arrest Burhan, then this one says this one is a rebel, it creates a very strong position. So we really need the two generals to speak the language of ceasefire, call their troops to order. But also I think the international community, the regional bodies, they got, it's unfortunate Sudan is the chair of IGAD, and the problem is there. But I think we need the pressure needs to continue. We don't need the silence like we saw after the other coup. There was a little bit of silence and lack of speaking about the situation. But I think the pressure needs to continue. We also need to restore the very basics that we've seen. There is no power. That's very key, because it creates more fear for the citizen in the midst of darkness.
Lack of access to medical facilities.
Yes, it's so basic, and if I don't have the very basic, the situation is even worse. So having humanitarian corridor would be very helpful for the citizen, and especially as they prepare to celebrate Eid al-Fitr, we need to create an environment where the day can be made better. And having a ceasefire is, I think, for me, one of the things, and ensuring there's humanitarian assistance get them, at least to make a day brighter, as we hope the whole situation can be addressed within a shortest time.
Indeed. Yes. And finally, Dr. Gideon, let me give you an opportunity to make the final remarks on that particular matter.
Yeah, thanks, Zainab. I think from where I stand, peace is paramount. And I'll go out on a limb and say peace is so paramount in this situation such that if it is the military government that will allow to stay in power, that will bring peace to the people of Sudan, they need closure to these cycles of violence, cycles of escalation, cycles of dire humanitarian crises. So the international community, from where I sit, needs to look at this peace puzzle slightly differently.
Right.
Not all peace agreements solve all the issues. So peace agreements are by nature an invitation to talk about issues that are troubling whatever region. So peace is paramount. And like the Chinese have a saying where they say black cat or white cat, so long as it catches a mouse, it is okay. So as long as the cat catches a mouse, they are good. So from where I sit, if it is a military government that is going to bring peace to Sudan, I welcome it, so long as within an agreed structure and framework. If it is a civilian government that will bring peace, so be it. But like Dr. Macharia said, we need peace. That cessation of hostilities agreement needs to be there. A ceasefire needs to be enforced. And if need be, the international community needs to think about some intervention measures just to save the lives within Sudan because of the responsibility to protect for those citizens.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And maybe just a quick update here. I was going through some of the international media reports, and the latest report here by Al Jazeera is talking about some of the developments. They are saying fighting continues to rage on in Sudan. Hours after that internationally brokered truce was supposed to have come into effect as forces loyal to the two generals battled for key locations in the capital, accusing each other of violating the ceasefire. There were loud gunfire reverberating in the background of live feeds by multiple television news channels in Khartoum. Minutes after that agreed 6 p.m. onset of the ceasefire. The regular army and the rival paramilitary rapid support forces have also issued statements at this point accusing each other of failing to respect the ceasefire. The army's high command said it would continue operations to secure the capital and other regions as well. And then there was also a statement from the United Nations spokesman Stefan Dujarric, who told a news briefing in New York, and I quote, he says, "We have not received any indications here that there has been a halting in the fighting." So which means then the conflict between Sudan's military leaders, the military leader and his deputy on Sudan's ruling council erupted 4 days ago, derailing that internationally backed plan for a transition to a civilian democracy 4 years after the fall of former leader Omar al-Bashir, to mass protests, and 2 years after a military coup. That's just the latest development with regard to that particular matter. We'll continue keeping a very close eye on the situation there. And I just want to thank my panelists this morning, Dr. Edgar Githua, International Affairs, Security and Diplomacy Analyst, for coming in this morning. Dr. Peter Mwencha, Senior Advisor, CATS International, that's Consumer Unity and Trust Society. It's actually a think tank working on economic and public policy issues, as well as Dr. Hannah Macharia, peace and security expert, at least in the context of this conversation. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming in, and we'll continue monitoring that situation as it continues to develop. My name is Zainab Ismail, but don't go away because I'll be coming up shortly in just about 4 to 5 minutes, and I will be taking over the reins of your world, and I'll be stepping in for Winnie Lubembe. We'll be having a conversation on protecting and promoting the rights of human rights defenders. So defending the defenders, that's a conversation. Stay with us. I'll be back in a short while.